This is the Atari 8-bit podcast.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Bruce Artwick was co-founder of SubLOGIC and creator of the best-selling program Flight Simulator 2. Flight Simulator 2 was first available for the Apple II computer, with versions later released for the TRS-80, Atari 8-bit, Commodore 64, and other platforms. His 1976 master's thesis, titled A Versatile Computer-Generated Dynamic Flight Display, about creating a real-time flight simulator on the PDP-11, provided some of the early research for his flight simulation software. Bruce was also creator of Night Mission Pinball, a popular pinball game that was available for the Apple II, Atari, C64, and DOS computers. This interview took place on August 7th, 2018. Check the show notes at ataripodcast.com for links to Bruce's thesis and some excellent background sites on the history of SubLOGIC and Microsoft Flight Simulator.
Well, I've always been interested in airplanes and flying ever since I was a kid, and my other big hobbies were electronics, and I was just really fascinated with computers. And when I went into college, I decided to take curriculum in electrical engineering. And so the first 2 years I went to Triton College in the Chicago area, but then to finish up my bachelor's in electrical engineering, I went to the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana and did a lot of coursework, but also I was really involved with the digital computer laboratory as kind of an hourly employee just to make some money to pay for school, and did a lot of digital design there. I really got to know how to design digital circuits and using 7400 series TTL, and even designed a computer. And so I got my bachelor's, and at the time the job market was really bad, so just continued on and got my master's degree in electrical engineering at U of I, and I was fortunate enough to get a research assistantship at Aviation Research Laboratories. I was out at the airport. It was really kind of a unique situation. Part of the psychology department, but the engineering aspect of it was we were developing three-dimensional computer displays that could be used for psychological research, for human factors analysis. And the computers that we had there were the mini computers. We had Raytheon 704 and PDP-11 mini computers, and so my job, my thesis basically was three-dimensional graphics display to be used for flight simulators. And I was not doing any flight simulation stuff. It was more three-dimensional graphics at that time. So after I graduated, I got a job at Hughes Aircraft out in Culver City, California. Mm-hmm. And and that was nothing at all having to do with flight simulation or graphics. It was in 1976, and I was in the radar systems group designing radar signal processors for things like F-15s and spy planes and stuff, and it was more hardware-oriented and really advanced computer-type design. We were way ahead of the technology at that point. Back then, the Z80 microcomputer had just come out, and 6502 around that time also. And we were working with 250 megahertz chips that we were designing, and also moving up to gallium arsenide chips, which is pretty advanced stuff. But anyway, I was also on the side just kind of computer hobbyist. That was right when the computer hobby stuff was starting. In January 1975 is when the Altair 8080 came out. And so I really felt like I wanted to get into that kind of stuff. So in the evenings, I'd be working with, putting together microcomputer stuff or building my own microcomputer. It was originally a Southwest Technical Products 6800 machine. Mm-hmm. And, knowing what I knew about computers and and mini computers. I did benchmarks and knew how fast things were. And I began to realize that you could do computer graphics on a microcomputer just about as well as some of the mini computers I've been using. So I decided to write an article about it. I got some graphics going on my FSII products machine, and I wrote an article for a magazine. It was Kilobaud Microcomputing. Mm-hmm. It was the October 77 issue, I think. And that was kind of the start of my company in kind of a strange way, because I wrote this article and I gave a listing for how to do three-dimensional transforms in BASIC. And of course, I had also done some in assembly language on the 8080. And the editor of Kilobaud Microcomputing asked me, he said, the article was good, he was going to publish it and everything, but a lot of people didn't know or didn't want to, type in and key in all these listings, and did I sell a package that did this stuff that they could just buy? And of course, I didn't at the time, so I told them, yes, I have a company that does that. And they said, what's the name of your company? I quickly said SubLOGIC Corporation, because back when I was, the Digital Computer Lab at U of I was doing a bunch of design on a multiplexer system for PDP-11, and it connects lots of terminals and teletypes and modems and stuff. And we were making these little boards that could plug into this multiplexer that could do different things, called SubLOGIC circuits. And I always thought that'd be kind of a nice name for a computer company, So when the editor asked if I had a company, I said, SubLOGIC Corporation. I began screwing around, trying to put together, at the time, cassette tapes with the listings and with the actual code on it. And I made up manuals and put them in plastic bags along with the tapes. I even offered it on a paper tape and punch cards if somebody wanted to buy it that way. Wow. But used to go to swap meets down in the Southern California area, But Lamp Hook, there was one that was hosted by Kilobaud and John Craig, who was the editor at the time. And I put my folding table on the top of my Datsun and pack up with the software packages. And it was basically the three-dimensional graphics product at the time. It could run on 8080 machines, the S100 machines. And so I was selling that. It was also available for the 6800 Southwest Idaho Products machines and also in BASIC. So after that...
So that wasn't even Flight Simulator 1 at this point. It was just a graphics thing, right?
Right. It was just computer graphics.
Yeah.
So anyway, I had a friend in Champaign, Illinois. That's where I went to school. And who was getting his master's in marketing. His name was Stu Moment. And I went back and I started to talk to him about my new company. And he was interested in getting involved too, mainly on the business side. So he was in Champaign and I was in Culver City. We started getting a little more professional about it. And, create advertisements that would go into the magazines of the time, Byte, Kilobaud, Personal Computing, and he eventually convinced me that I should quit my job and do this full time, which back then was probably a pretty, sounded like kind of a stupid thing to do, having a job at Hughes Aircraft. But
right.
I decided to do it and moved back to Champaign and lived on a shoestring there. It was cheaper overhead too, of course, because it wasn't the cost of LA living. But we were selling the graphics products, software, and also we got kind of a distributorship for a company called Matrox that made computer graphics cards for S100 systems. And I believe those guys are still in business. They're up in Canada. But so we'd be selling these graphics boards and also graphics software. And I remember we were really striving for our first $1,000 software a month. We'd sell actually $1,000 worth of software. Mm-hmm. And, selling $49 packages. We eventually did, and we go to computer shows and stuff like consumer electronics shows, CES and other shows. And I did talks occasionally about this 3D computer graphics stuff. And I was once giving a talk about it, and I said that this can be used for things like computer-aided design, and also you could probably take it and on a desktop computer have a three-dimensional display out the window of an airplane and put up an instrument panel and make your own flight simulator that you could fly right from your desktop. And the audience just gasped, and I was just amazed at that. I thought, there might be some possibilities here. So, I just moved back to Champaign, and it was the fall of '79, and that's when I wrote Flight Simulator 1 for the new Apple II computer. It was all written in 6502 assembly language. I'm using my 6502 assembly language drivers for the graphics, and it came up with some flight equations that I implemented also in the same memory space, and in Flight Simulator 1. And that's kind of how it got to be. It was first on the Apple II.
Wow. So was it challenging porting it to a microcomputer? I mean, previously you had worked on more powerful machines like PDPs and things. Did you have to make significant changes in order to get it to run on a little Apple?
Well, not that much. I mean, of course, it was a different language, 6502 assembly language versus Raytheon 704 assembly language or PDP-11 assembly language. But actually, the thing was what development system to use to develop the product more than the product, the code itself, because you really couldn't do much high-power development directly on an Apple II. And what I had was S100 systems that, I'd build them out with lots of memory and the best floppies at the time and everything to make development more, easier. Before that, though, I was actually using cassette. When I was doing the three-dimensional graphics only stuff back in 1977 when I started SubLOGIC, I was actually doing compiles and assemblies on cassette. So floppy was a big step forward, and also there had just come a new thing called the Winchester disk drive, and a company up in the Bay Area called Godbot Electronics came out with a system called I forgot exactly what I called it, but it was like a 29 megabyte Winchester drive. It was about the size of, it was weighed about 30 pounds. It was 29 megabytes, but that was amazing at the time. Using things like that, and using assemblers that were available at the time, like Microsoft's MASM, and also some stuff that I'd written. It was possible to do compiles and everything much easier. And over RS-232 link, I downloaded to the target machine, whether it was an Apple or Atari or Commodore, that sort of thing. So, but the code, the challenge was always fitting it into the memory space. I mean, Flight Simulator 1, if I remember right, you could actually run at 16K of memory. And, but the code was quite recursive, a lot of subroutines, and the assembly language is very tight also. So you can fit a lot on a small area. I remember having big memory maps drawn out on paper of, where all the individual modules are going to fit within this memory space, and so it wasn't so much the coding of it was packaged into small memory space. And it's true that those are only 8-bit processors, but the Raytheon and the PDP-11 were 16-bit processors, so you just would write subroutines that did 16-bit stuff, like 16-bit multiplier, and of course you'd use a few instructions to do 16-bit add, and The original flight simulator was in 16-bit integer arithmetic.
Were there struggles at the time to make it run at a decent FPS? I imagine.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Tell me about that.
Yeah. Well, those processors weren't very powerful, and the databases had to be simple. Flight Simulator 1 just had a vector database, so that there was no shading or anything like that. It was just line drawing. And so that little 6502 8-bit processor had to do 16-bit arithmetic for all the flight equations, the three-dimensional graphics transforms, the two-dimensional drawing on the screen, and it had to do it all real time. And, getting frame rates between, 3 and 7 or 8 frames a second was a challenge. But, keeping the database simple was the only way to do that, because the frame rate would degrade as the complexity of the database would increase. So, the things started to change as the processor started to get more powerful. And not so much in the 8-bit machines, though, because most of those 8-bit machines ran their 6502s at like 1.7 megahertz, and it didn't really improve much over time. But definitely no shading or advanced graphics like that. It would just slow down the frame rate way too much.
Right. Let's talk about the transition to creating Flight Simulator 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, at the time, Flight Simulator 1 went to the top of the Apple charts, and I also made a TRS-80 version of it for the Radio Shack TRS-80, which is an 8080 machine. And again, another 8-bit microprocessor. But their graphics was really terrible. It's much lower resolution than the Apple. But being that, it was a good demonstration of graphics as well as a flight simulator, one day in early 1980, I got a call from IBM down in Boca Raton, Florida, and they were saying that they're working on a new computer. I would like to see about, if I could transfer some of the flight simulator technology and the graphics over to their new machine, just to show that it could do superior computer graphics. And a couple of days later, I got a call from Microsoft out in Seattle, Washington at the time, in Bellevue, Washington, and a guy named Vern Rayburn, who said that they were a small company with only 200 employees, and they were doing a little project for some big company that they couldn't name. They were doing a new computer for them, and wanted to know if I could come out and talk to them about moving Flight Simulator over to that machine to show the graphics capabilities of it. So, and I put two and two together. I first flew down to Boca Raton and visited with IBM. And after that, I flew out to Seattle and visited Microsoft. And I really liked more the atmosphere with Microsoft, because they were, a young entrepreneurial company, and they weren't afraid of, dealing with an engineer like me and sharing the profits. IBM would cap any of my royalties or anything I did at a ridiculously low rate. But Microsoft, if you help them out, they'd help you out at the time. So I decided to go with them, and that was the beginnings of Microsoft Flight Simulator on the new IBM PC. And when that finally came out, and it took quite a bit of development to do. And of course, the graphics were far superior, because the 8088, it was like at 4 megahertz, was powerful enough to do a little bit of things like shading and shaded graphics instead of just vector graphics. And decided to sacrifice a little bit of the frame rate, but to get better graphics, because that was the purpose of it for them, displaying how they could do shaded graphics on their color graphics card and everything. So that came out, and at the time there were only a couple of games available on the IBM PC. There's like Olympic Decathlon, and I don't know, a couple of first-person shooter games, I guess. But it came out, and everybody was, pretty amazed that it did what it did. And there's a big clamoring, of course, in the Apple II and TRS-80 fans that they wanted to see that on their machines, which I thought at the time it's impossible. It's just too much for that lower speed technology. And but there was such a clamoring for it that I decided to try. And by that time, I had like 4 or 5 engineers working with me at SubLOGIC in Champaign. And we had a big project that we did developing Flight Simulator 2 for the Apple II. And one of the big improvements on that, too, versus 1 is Flight Simulator 1 had just kind of a synthetic database, which was just a square grid with like a mountain range drawn with vector graphics. So I decided on Flight Simulator 2 to use real maps. I think that was one of the big breakthroughs that really helped the popularity of the program. It decided to use real geography, and I had 4 areas: Chicago to Champaign, New York to Boston, LA to San Diego, and Seattle, Washington area. So it kind of gave people around the country one of those things in their own backyard, at least not too far from them. So anyway, we put it onto the Apple II, which was a major project. And I remember I sunk a whole lot of money into that. I had these engineers all working for me, and we bought all this equipment, and we unveiled it at Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago, I believe it was. And at the time, my partner and friend Stu, who's a business guy, I remember us being on the floor of that with our display, and we're showing Flight Simulator 2, and he came up to me and said, "Guess what? Our checkbook has just hit $0." And about 5 minutes later, a guy came up to me and said he was from Billboard magazine, and our Flight Simulator 2 on the Apple II just hit #1 of its charts. And then all the money came pouring in, and that was kind of a great story, But
yeah.
But at the time, of course, there were the other machines, the Atari, and the Commodore 64 was starting to make itself present too, and people were clamoring for it on that. So just taking the Apple code as the core and then modifying some of the graphics and operating system hooks, we could get that going on those machines too. So it was available for the Atari 800 series and Commodore 64 and Apple II. It was pretty much our 8-bit lineup.
Yeah. Were you involved with the conversion to Atari and that sort of thing?
Well, to some extent, but I had like 4 or 5 engineers. And
sure.
I hadn't been working that much on the Atari version, I think. Actually, the similarities in our development systems, that was all the same for these machines. It's kind of hard to remember exactly what I contributed to each one. I know that the basic computer or the basic graphics code and flight simulation, flight equations code, I never let anybody touch except myself until version 3 of Microsoft Flight Simulator. So in that respect, all the stuff on the Atari, the 3-dimensional code and the flight simulation code is all mine. But, so I did directly work on it. But,
sure. There's a
just
team.
as I did on the others. It's all kind of similar machines.
Right. My assumption was always that you chose Meigs Field as the home starting airport because it was your home starting airport. Is that right?
Yeah, it was in Chicago. That's where I grew up and everything, and went to school at U of I down Champaign, about 150 miles south, and that's why I made it go from Chicago to Champaign. And Meigs Field is was a great little airstrip. It's right on the lake. It has all this great downtown Chicago scenery with Grant Park and buildings, city buildings there, and get to land on this small strip. It's almost like an aircraft carrier. So I had flown into there a couple times. I forgot to mention that when I was at Aviation Research Labs, and a little bit before that, my friend Stu again, he's a flight instructor, and in addition to being in business curriculum, and I joined the Flying Illini Flying Club and learned to fly and got my pilot's license in 1975. So, which was a requirement for working out at Aviation Research Labs, doing my thesis to have a pilot's license, or at least to be getting one. So anyway, I've been flying mostly out of Champaign Willard Airport. That's where I did all my flight training. But I'd go up to Meigs Field occasionally too. And, so that's a route I knew. It was a nice airport and very scenic. So I decided to use that one.
Nice. Do you still fly today, or do you use a flight simulator today?
I still fly a little bit. I had my own plane. I had my own plane up until probably 2008 or so. But after 2001, the flight restrictions became so tight. After 9/11, that it made flying a real chore. I lived in Champaign, but I had a summer house up in Door County, Wisconsin, which is about 400 miles. So I had a hangar up there and a hangar down at Champaign Willard Airport, and I had a Piper Dakota engine or plane that had a powerful engine. I could go about 150 miles an hour, and even up to have retractable landing gear. So that's kind of my little transportation system. But after 9/11, there's a bunch of reactors and sensitive things between Green Bay, Wisconsin, and Champaign. Is like an obstacle course. I'd have to fly around and on air get trouble. I really reduced my flying too. Also, after that time period, general aviation, small planes really went down in popularity. The costs went up a lot. Of fuel prices really shot up, and a lot of fixed base operators, these little airports, started catering more to business jets, and one in Champaign would hardly give me service anymore, just being a little single engine prop plane. But so I sold my plane. It was probably 2008 or something. Maybe a little later than that. But my latest trip, my friend Stu is still an avid pilot. He was on a little airstrip, has about 4 or 5 planes in various states of repair, and he came out here to visit just last year. He flew Cessna 172 out here, and we took that 172 up from Santa Fe Airport and flew up to Glenwood Springs, Colorado, and did some hiking up there. But flying in the mountains and stuff, it's a different experience, and I flew most of the way myself on that one. So the pilot's license will never expire. You just have to be current. So, so I can fly whenever I want, and again, with someone like that, I just usually got the left to see it and fly.
Sure.
But I don't have a plane anymore. So.
A couple of random questions. Someone's wondering if there was a custom version of Flight Simulator made for Cessna's retail flight stores. Yeah,
I kind of remember that. Yeah, and I remember one thing we had to do is, it used to be that when you crashed the plane, there'd be a big explosion sound, and the windshield would shatter. And
and it said crash. Yeah.
Yeah, they made us take all that stuff out for their thing for their flight store. But yeah, it was a simple modification.
So, how do you keep yourself busy today? What do you do these days?
Well, I sold my company at the time, BAL, to Microsoft in 1996, and I was a consultant with Microsoft and DreamWorks for a few years after that. But after that, I had just been involved with a couple of little company startups that didn't really go anywhere, when doing some streaming graphics stuff, and that company kind of crashed and burned. So I pretty much, with the proceeds I got from selling my company, I decided to get more into my own investing and just manage my own portfolio. So, when I sold my company, the industry was really changing, and I could feel it was more being driven from the business side, and it was getting pretty cutthroat, and that wasn't the kind of thing that I would be good at being in, and it was a good time to get out of it. Of course, it was before the crash in 2000, so that was good. But since then, I've these other little companies and also managing my portfolios, and just lately been doing a lot of traveling. Last year, early this year, in December, January, I was down in Antarctica visiting research stations and
wow.
Kayaking and hiking down there. I was on a cruise at the small cruise line. It's interesting that on the same cruise was Steve Wozniak. And he was there. I guess he gave him a free trip if, he gave a few talks and lectures on the tour. So he did, and he kind of gave his whole history and background in his early days at HP and Apple and stuff. And for most people, they were pretty bored, but I was really interested, and it was just like living the old days again, listening to what he had to say. So, but basically, to your question, just basically a lot of traveling. I have a place here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and also a place, condo in Chicago that overlooks Millennium Park and Grant Park. You can see what used to be Meigs Field and the aquarium, the planetarium. And Meigs Field, of course, has been bulldozed down by the last mayor and turned into this big nature park or something. It's not there anymore.
I gotta say, when they shut down Meigs Field, I had never been there. I'd never actually been to that airport, but I'd flown in and out of it so many times in Flight Simulator 2 that I felt genuine sadness when that airport went away. And it just didn't seem fair.
Yeah, I totally agree. There was a lot of people and business guys used that thing, and there's this big fan club dedicated to it too, Friends of Meigs. But I think Flight Simulator probably had a little bit of an influence on them, building the popularity of it. But Chicago politics. Mayor Daley, he had the bulldozers going there in the middle of the night and just tore the whole thing up. His philosophy was he'd never be able to get permission, so it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. And there went Meigs. Now it's this nature park that people walk around. Very, very few people walk around. It's kind of a tragedy that it's gone. It was great airport. Yeah. Just one little side thing about Meigs. One of my friends down in Champaign, who got a degree there too, is Tom Siebel. I don't know if you've heard of Siebel Systems up in the Bay Area there, but he became a multi-billionaire and everything. But we, ride motorcycles together and everything. And we were once downtown Chicago and looking at Meigs Field, and they were talking about getting rid of the Meigs. And they said, if they get rid of Meigs, the business, a lot of the business people here will just, pack up and say, I don't need this, move somewhere else, like out to the Bay Area. It happened to some extent, a lot of business people use that airport, and took away a good thing.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to pivot real quick and talk about Night Mission Pinball, which is probably the program no one asks you about, but you're credited with that.
Yeah.
Not
for a long time.
Yeah. What inspired you to make a pinball game amidst all this other stuff? Well, there's a guy out there whose software was on the charts too. His name was Bill Budge. Sure.
He had a program called Raster Blaster. Mm-hmm. And I was, reading some interviews with him, and his program is doing very well, and Flight Simulator is also doing very well. And he told the interviewer that, he thinks maybe the next thing he was going to do is a flight simulator. So I decided that I was going to do a pinball game and try and blow him off the charts. And it kind of did, for a while, because his thing was getting old by then anyway, but Night Mission Pinball went to number one or two on the charts at that time too. And but I remember once I was at a thing out in San Francisco. I think it was like the Billboard Awards or something. At the time, things like Billboard magazine, they didn't really know what was going to be the model for software artists. Were they going to be like celebrities? Were they going to like book authors? Or just be like nerdy engineers or what?
Yeah.
So they'd taken the celebrity route. So as they're getting some award, and so was Bill Budge, and we were kind of at a little party afterwards, and we were talking, me and Bill Budge about that, and he really complimented me on Night Mission Pinball. He said, "Yeah, it's step beyond Raster Blaster." Of course, there's a little bit later technology too, but yeah, he was a good guy, and one of the first guys in electronic arts.
Yes, indeed. Do you have the source code for any of this old stuff anymore?
Yeah, I have all of it. It's all archived on disk. So I remember back in the mid '90s or early '90s, before they had writable DVDs and CDs. I archived all this stuff. I grabbed as much as I could off of our servers and put it onto magneto-optical drives. And some of those have failed, but I have really good backup procedures. I kind of pride myself on never having lost a file. So I've got all that stuff, but I really don't have the equipment to. Well, it's since been transferred to hard drives, and the whole archives, are relatively small compared to all the other stuff these days. It's so compact. But I think Microsoft Flight Simulator, the total is just like a couple million lines of source code. But wow. I don't have the machines to really run it. I haven't flown Flight Simulator for many years. My thing is new technology, and a lot of people, maybe your group there too, it's back and like some nostalgia and everything, the history of all this older stuff. But for me, whatever is new is what I'm after. Yeah, and so I really am not much of a collector of old hardware or software or things like that, and I just don't really have the equipment to run a lot of this stuff.
What new thing is exciting you right now?
Well, I don't know. There's not much. I mean, I have a really good system set up with, PCs here in Chicago, backing up everything to servers I have there. And most of it's business stuff.
Yeah.
I do a lot of, internet stuff, just more being on the internet, not producing anything for it. So, but my friend Stu has a couple of websites. Actually, one of them is, I think, SubLOGIC.biz or something like that. And he's trying to put together like a history of SubLOGIC. I don't know if it's biz. I don't know what the domain title.
I'll try to find it.
Yeah, it was SubLOGIC. And he also has a site. He's into history, and a site called Salt of America. He does, but I never really did much with building websites and stuff like that. I had one back many years ago, and in fact, it was bao.com.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's a 3-letter domain, and that's pretty rare and pretty expensive now. And eventually, I sold the domain to a Chinese company and for a huge amount of money. Domain broker.
Sure. All right, I think I just have a couple last questions for you. What haven't I asked you about the Flight Simulator 2 days that I should have? Is there a story or that you need to tell, or a question I should have asked?
Well, yeah, maybe one thing it kind of relates to Atari. Back after Flight Simulator 2, or Microsoft Flight Simulator was made for the 8080, there were a lot of other companies and or microcomputer companies that wanted to have it on their machines. Mm-hmm. And so we did some porting. And one of the machines and one of the groups that I really kind of got involved with a lot was a new company out in San Jose called Amiga, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And this is right at the beginnings of Amiga. It's a bunch of guys from Tonka and Atari that had gotten together to form this company to make this 16-bit computer. And so I go out there to San Jose, and they wanted me to, put something on their machine because they wanted it to be a graphics powerhouse as well as good for business and graphics design and that sort of thing, which it turned out to be. But I remember it was in a little office park, and they probably had a couple thousand square feet there. And in the front of the offices was an office with Jay Miner and his assistant, Japanese guy, developing the chips for it. Because he's the guy who developed the chips for the 2600. He's with Atari, and they eventually left because Atari didn't want to do a 16-bit machine, and he wanted to do a 16-bit machine. And his Amiga, so I got there and I was developing a product for them called Radar Raiders. It's not like a fighter jet, shooter kind of game. Mm-hmm. And I used their good PCM sound system to sample the jet engine, and it's good sound and good graphics flying over terrain. And the Amiga was introduced at an event at Lincoln Center in New York, and outside of the main hall, we had lots of Amigas set up running our various software. And inside, they gave the presentation where they showed its capabilities on big screen, and had Debbie Harry from the group Blondie pose for a picture made with the Amiga, and then Andy Warhol would color it, and do artsy stuff with it to just show up what a good machine this was for art and that sort of thing. So in the rehearsals for it, Andy Warhol was there, and he did all this amazing stuff. And so the final day came, and they did the presentation on the Amiga, and Debbie Harry's picture was taken, and he put one blotch of color on it, and she kind of filled with red color. Mm-hmm. They said, that's it. That's the picture I wanted. So it didn't really demonstrate much of it at all. Just this red picture of her. But anyway, after the show, they came out, and people were coming out to the display area where all this stuff was. So I had my game, Radar Raiders going, flying over this terrain real fast, high frame rate with PCM sound, kind of rumbling, and he kept telling me to turn it down. But the group Jay Miner and some of his guys and people that were kind of following him, and he's showing them around, showing them the applications, the word processors and the paint programs and everything. Came up to Radar Raiders, and Jay Miner told the people to take a look at this. This is what I designed my chips to do. And it really made me feel good. That Jay Miner, the developer of the 2600 and all these great Atari products, was using his chips for what he wanted to do.
Excellent.
There's a
amazing
good story I like to talk about. Other than that,
okay. Last question then. If you could send a message to the people who still enjoy using Flight Simulator 2, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Well, I'd say thank you for using my products over the years and even to this day. And I think aviation is a great field to be in, especially now with the demand for pilots being so strong. If you have interest in that area, it's a great field to go into. And the simulation technology now is getting so good that it's more than just entertainment, and even on microcomputers. And stick with it, and you could have a great career if you wanted to in that area. I appreciate support over the years and the programs I've written.
Thank you so much, Bruce.
Okay, welcome. It's been fun.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute, there are two ways you can help. You can help fund these interviews directly by contributing to my Patreon. A small monthly contribution will help offset the expenses of making these oral history interviews. Contribute at patreon.com/Savitz. Or make a tax-deductible contribution to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library that has done incredible things to preserve computer history. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate. Thanks.